Flyting. For all this and all that, and nature sparking at my elbow. This is for emptiness, this is for gluttony, this is for mawkishness thrashed to a foam. This is for blisters on sisters and whirlwinds, for all those who need to slide closer to home. This is slash burning to upstart opinion, each vice vouchsafed, each virtue sublime, invention exhausted though scarcely invented, the work of the self in sufficiency of time. This is for thin change and careful advances. This is for fuck it and do as you please. This is for fine words that butter no parsnips, creeping to heaven on well-padded knees. This is a labyrinth hedged in with simony, nosing in circles to subtle intent. This is for chalky thighs speckled like sausages, grinding the teeth of an old discontent. This is for namelessness, this is for avarice, this is for lunging to deathless renown. This for necessity razoring chances, howling and hounded like bears around town. This gives the gist of it, this takes the sting from it. One thing goes pulsing, then everything does. This is specific for whatever ails thee. Go take up serpents, use beeswax and buzz. This is for musicae, this is for techne. In fire hail and fire flocht, the word has come down. Namelessness, brainlessness, boasting an accolade. This is for trumpery, sparking a crown. This one will harrow them, garlic and bryony, blocking and grudging and pecking apart. This is New Testament, flinty, then fluvial, saltires and salvos to uncluttered art. Alba is the old name of Scotland, and the Roman historian Tacitus had his view on Scotland, which this very short piece provides some corrective to. Alba. Foedum, Tacitus said the weather was. Well, better the weather foul than the will of the people. Jimp. Jimp she was, neat as a needle, sprightly, lively, slender as grass. Annals of Enlightenment. Hume passes into the absolute, brace-girdled, without concern. James, Laird of Auchinleck, as this transpires, lays boisterous breath along his doxy's shoulder, elevates the skirt, and takes her on the dust of a stonemason's table some way below the castle hill. In or out of armour, which would you rather? Cool release of the bon philosophe, or Boswell's perturbation? Much to be endured, and little to be enjoyed, or what mix in between? At 10, a drum for Clart and creesh on close and Vennel. The wind in a shift lifts leaves along old Carlton wall. Incantation. Beginning with a couplet from Carmina Gadelica and with grace notes from the same source. I have a charm for the bruising, a charm for the blackening, a charm for cheats and impostors. I summon from the cold clear air, from the bare branches of the trees, from worms coiling under the ground, charm against cruel intent, charm for neglect, charm against wicked indifference. May it lie on the white backs of the breakers of the sea, may it lie on the furthest reaches of the wind. A salve for those who would grudge against the poor, a salve for those who would harry the innocent, a salve for those who would murder children. May it lie in the stoniest stretches of the hills, may it lie in the darkest shelving along the shore. A salve for those that would cram whatever life they have with possession, for the rage of owning without entitlement, for the desperate, murderous possession of things. May it lie on the cloud banks that range across the sky, may it lie on the face of Rannoch Moor in its remoteness. A charm against mystification by doctors, a charm against deception by the self-appointed, a charm against horrific insistence. From the breeze that stirs the last of the yellowing leaves, from the slanting of the sun as it falls through the window, a salve against grasping, a salve against preaching, a salve against promises exacted by threat. Grace of form, grace of voice, grace of virtue, grace of sea, grace of land and air, grace of music, grace of dancing. A salve against the uselessness of envy, a salve against denial of our own best nature, a salve against bitter enmity and silence. Grace of beauty, grace of spirit, grace of laughter, grace of the fullness of life itself, a salve to bind us, a salve to strengthen heart and happiness. May it lie in the star blanket there to spread over us. May it lie in the first light at the waking of day. Mao and the Death of Birds. Because they took, he thought, more than their fair share of grain, Mao decided the birds must die. It could be this embraced concern for the common weal, but economics has its own imperative. How did they do this? Well, all one day, as long as it took, the people banged on pots and pans, whatever withering cacophony they could raise to keep the birds aloft. Denied a roost, they flew until their wings could not support them. The people gathered every one and put the pots to other use. Was this not fine? The people, thus instructed, dined on all that died. Mao might have smiled and no doubt gathered in his own fair share. Next year, without the birds, the insects all enjoyed a carnival in turn. The harvest failed and failed again, until in millions people died. Was this not then resoundingly complete? What Mao had to say when all transpired again I must regret, I have no note, but do recall another claim he brought with pride, of intellectual numbers down, more than any emperor that came before. How that was done was less spectacular than what removed our feathered friends, merely another bland imperative. At least they didn't cook them where they fell. He probably would draw the line at that. When arbitrary despots rule, we all are thralled to blind obedience. Innocent and ignorant, the Chinese people died, and songs and words of those they killed will come again, although in what form is hard to say. But may some demon boil the bones of Mao in Yangtze's seething flood for evermore, with everlasting death to his vain glory. One Line at a Time is a selection of a series of 5 poems, and they were composed really by going through texts, fairly well-known texts, and just flicking through, taking a line, jotting it down, and not cheating really, and then composing them into pieces. And the first is called Simply Platonic, and its selections are from The Trial and Death of Socrates. Simply Platonic. Because a harmony has no part in the inharmonical, nor the swallow, nor yet the hoopoe, their several affections, active and passive, were all for the best, whether essence of equality, beauty, or anything else, wrapped in a goatskin or some other disguise, like the sound of the flute in the ears of the mystic. The terrible nature of her confinement, although not the same as oddness, is not dissolved or decomposed at once. Kanticle. Since space is not a composite, even poisons have their use, changing its meaning to suit our convenience, resting reason on empty figments of the brain. The elimination of all personal freedom, a world of the senses and a world of the understanding, would have to be an intuition. sometimes covered with fruit, sometimes with ice or snow, some transcendental ground of appearance, the idea always true in itself. And Rhetorical Devices has selections from Aristotle's The Art of Rhetoric. Rhetorical Devices. Serious or trivial, just or unjust, people must be kept on good terms. Self-sufficiency is also a good, aptitude to learn, quick wits. The more so, the more memorable, games, relaxation, and sleep. Being able to be mocked and mocking with grace, they also nourish suspicions. If one thing is possible, then so is the other, like dogs biting on stones, but not touching the one that throws them. A kind of communal expediency, the same thing threatens them both. Epistemology has selections from Meaning by Polanyi and Prosh. Epistemology. Kept on a short leash or smothered in many blankets, perception has this inexhaustible profundity, a particular instance of rendering thanks, a pouring on of water. How is it accomplished? Assessment of plausibility is as it is and not some other thing, a stick to feel one's way in the dark. One cannot speak of dogs without having a word for them. Roots of this perversion go deep. Yet all this is beside the point, like brewing or pottery. Stones fell because their end was downwards, beyond expression of a sentimental attachment, a name, an image, a shadow, the baby given to the breast, restlessness and sleep. And finally, receipt, which is an old word for recipe, and receipt, the selections are from A Taste of Scotland. Receipt. It is an ideal occupation for children on a wet afternoon. Put them head to tail in an oven-proof dish and remove any pips. Score as above or into little bars. Do not roll, for this also toughens. Cover with foil with a weight on top. Wrap the birds in the bacon rashers. Melt the fat in a saucepan. Turn over when little bubbles appear. Whip the egg whites very stiff, then coat the other side. Take out with a perforated spoon. Add watercress, fried oatmeal or skirley. When cut, it is a soft pink butter. The gravy is served separately. Phytogeny. If I were a tree, I'd be ancient. Girth increases, growth rings get narrower. Canopy reduced as new wood steadily declines. Then fungi come to hollow heartwood, lichens splash gardens on broken stumps beyond. Retrenchment may go on and on before sparse living crown declares decay. Like a tree, too, I am become in this state more attractive to other forms of life. The fungi, of course, but saprosilic insects fancy me as well, sipping or scuttling wherever they may. Rare and uncommon beetles line up to take their turn. In and around the root, my coryzae engage themselves in ways I'm not exactly anxious to inquire. Mosses, ferns, and bryophytes compete to keep me green. People are naturally drawn, it says right here, to big old trees, tenacious, timeless. Phosphor at sunrise, Venus, the morning star, silently combusts. Spirited though in decline, I'd say, and best, as mayhap, the whispering below still clear, despite some flutterings above. There's a long epigraph to this poem Carbon Atom, which is from the Eames office, and it's taken from commentary on a project they had called Powers of 10. Carbon atom. Now we are among the two innermost electrons of the carbon atom. They mark out in their dance a neat sphere of electric charge. The 4 outer electrons of carbon can come and go, whether in flame, in diamond, or in DNA. But these inner electrons remain indifferent to ordinary experiences, which cannot disturb their seclusion. They respond only to the nucleus within. A lightning strike can knock us off our stride, or radiation shifting in the sun's inside. Make it 10 to the power of 3 or 4, and now you're talking. Nerve enough to tap excuse me on the perfect floor or plane and swerve us into something special, not da capo, same old stuff again. We don't have much to do with light that's visible, only the rays that Röntgen gazed straight through. We never court seclusion. What appears indifference may be misconstrued. We do not sport the peacock flashiness of those lewd variable neighbours in the outer port, turning to fossil fuel or jewels or life. Here in the inner ring, just through the wall, our symmetry, our charge, our dance is all. Nor strength, nor love, nor poison prove. The core alone can stir us to remove. This poem, called Grass of Levity, the first stanza is borrowed, it's anonymous, it dates to 1609, and the rest just follows on from that. Grass of Levity. Grass of levity, span in brevity, flowers felicity, fire of misery, wind stability, is mortality. Simple utility, fingered lubricity, sprung from audacity, known for rapacity, any capacity is mortality. Boundless servility, neighbouring nility, primping polity, bits of carnality, vanity, vanity is mortality. What doesn't signify, render or simplify, impaled and crucified, sat down or sanctified, any identity is mortality. Further and further space, gruesome and human face, graceless or born to grace, here in this little space, light in our little case, is mortality. She said, "Your man fed the birds in Ireland, or so the story goes. Finches, robins, taught them to come to his hand. For all I know, he could have led them in snatches of song. When he left, the cat made short work of all their whistly perplexities." This next poem is called Saturno Conditum, and it was written following a visit to the town of Arpino, which is a hill town and just southwest of Rome. And it was the birthplace of Cicero, and I was invited there. And the ancient town, above the ancient town, is an even more ancient settlement where there are walls that are built by these one-eyed cyclopic giants in legend. And Cicero comes into the poem because he writes a letter to his friend. He wrote a letter to a friend who was off in northern Greece, and he said, "I wish you were here." He said, amongst all the people in this large house, he actually was mortgaged. He got a mortgage off one of his enemies to buy a house, which was not a wise thing to do. In this big house, and in the Senate, because he was a member of Senate, he said, "I can't find anyone with whom I can share an intimate grumble or an unguarded joke." And that last piece of that quote comes into the poem. There are 2 words in Latin, hospes et humus. It just means guest and earth. And the poem is just about the view across from the town across the valley. Oh, I should say, the thing that prompted it chiefly was a motto in the square, the main town square, which I saw was Arpinum a Saturno Conditum, Arpino founded by Saturn. Saturno Conditum. My friend, across the space within this ancient hilltop town, everything gives breath to what we wish or might aspire to. Whatever the Volscians, whatever those who built cyclopic walls before them felt, we feel. Seeking beyond beauty or ambition, one at least to share an unguarded joke, fireflies at night. Hospes et humus, guests a little while, then gone. Broom, elder, lemon flower, the fragrance of valerian, all this in a loom of light is shuttled back and forth. Swifts and martins carve the air. Each olive tree on every slope is shaped to give its tiny blue-green song of praise. Landing. The trouble with heaven is no passion. The trouble with hell is no love. In that case, pure purgatory would seem to be the best place to alight, trimming the birches, skimming the reed beds, to splash down and shaking the water from our wings. In Whole House Farm, we used to be asked to house sit this small holding in Garsdale, and it was called Whole House Farm, which always seemed to me a kind of progression. Whole House Farm. The children have got a bonfire going in the back garden. 4 potatoes, 3 eggs, and next to no idea of how to go about it. 3 sheep with long tails in the middle distance crunch their way towards me. Rain spots down. The evening cools to grey and green. If I were to say to you, my heart is like a log on fire, it wouldn't be true, not even close. But the nearest thing I have to love is this, is you, here, even when the desperate animals interrupt, and some dog makes the mistake of barking all strangers away. Well, as to Epistle from Pefkos, most of this piece was written at Pefkos on the island of Rhodes on the Thursday of the week of Gail Turnbull's funeral and finished on my return to Scotland. The tsunami that's mentioned towards the end came in December of the same year, but was not anticipated then or here. It's worth saying that earlier printed versions of Section 5 featured a cicada, but from my own description I would now certainly say it was a locust. Epistle from Pefkos. For Gail Turnbull. Gail, the bougainvillea here sends greetings in the deepest cloudy pink. Hibiscus too at the kitchen window, blatant scarlet. Along the lanes nearby, acacia, almond, oleander, fig. A full-blown date palm occupies the yard next door. All round the house low grapevines trail a welcome. Anna, our kindly Pefkian yaya, calls to water them first thing. Behind the town the mountain ridge is grey and arid, pecked and hulled like tufa. At night, in the starry dark, it looms at our back as banks of cloud. Twice or thrice a day, the steep down shelving blue thalassa laps us round. Staying afloat's no bother here. The briny deep can raise us up in temperatures equivalent to bliss. Anyone would want to swim in this, whether they could swim or no. A glass-bottomed boat took us round today to Lindos, over reefs that looked much closer than they were. We knew when the sea was blue below it stretched at least to 15 fathoms. Yanis joked, "I lost my last boat here." "No problem. Only foreigners aboard." The overplump industrialist astraddle the prow shows a good profile and tries to look meagre for his supermodel squeeze or lumber, a Glasgow term like pony in West Clare. She is lissom enough, complacent, blonde and cocoa-tanned. One-piece ebony swimsuit, narrowly V'd, elegant pelvis, fine long femurs tapering down. We squeaked a couple of times between close pock-marked cliffs. I'm trying to think of what might catch the texture of those rocks. Exaggerated ash and pumice, pinnacles and crevices, pachyderm sponge cake iced with H2SO4. The rest of the passengers undemonstrative. Not many fish in evidence underneath, some dots and splinters, intermittent shoals. In my hand, a postcard of 4 women who cut and gather thin corn or dried grass stalks for plaiting. They work a line on a high headland with the sea behind them. One wears a short straw bonnet against the sun. Others have white headscarves wound round so little of their faces and none of the neck or throat shows. It's not enough to say that it must be hot work. They wear shirts, skirts, aprons and dresses of blue, grey, pink and white, with further binding to protect the skin at their forearms and wrists. It could be Rhodes. It might be Orkney or fields above Cullen, after a dozen years of sudden climate change. They must pause and stretch, bind with some wisps, and stoop again. Although they are posed and angled here a little, you can imagine it any time, almost anywhere. It looks too hot for casual chat. A word or two perhaps in a longer easing stretch. Anything else held back for whatever break they get, and when. Stepped out the kitchen door to rearrange laundry draped in the sun, and found when I came back in a locust just inside on the terracotta-coloured floor. The locust is light brownish grey, with tiger striping atop his back-propelling legs. I look. He stays. After a pause, he kick-loops a metre or so and grips the edge of the inside whitewashed wall. He feels or checks quite slowly with the sock-shaped end of the near front limb. His scrapers at the back are like square combs or harrows neatly toothed. I know he is not thinking, where and what the fuck is this? But well he might, if that is what he could. God, is there anything creamier than yogurt curds with monolithous mountain honey stirred right through? Is there anything more grateful to the appetite at noon and no one else in view? I lick the plate. I lick the spoon again. I do not doubt that you would do the same. Gael, your bones are charred or ash, or in a lair from Curry Church interred. I wasn't there and have no details yet. Your sensibility survives in all your friends, your family of contact, near, dear, or accidental. Yesterday I thought I could detect the coastal shape of Turkey. Earlier in the week, perhaps, the outline of a warship or patrol boat, grey, low-slung along the line of haze and sea. Politics and menace are always there, even when we can hardly make them out. Plumeri is the place I would go back to if I had the time and transport. Not much more than a harbour shaded by an ugly concrete elevated wall. Some genuine working boats. A couple of people casting from the pier, and well along the curving beach 2 men with 6 rods apiece fixed in shore gravel. Behind the sand, reed beds and bamboo scrub. Just by the road, Zwodohos Pigi, the source of life, the guidebook says, a sanctuary shut with bolts and boards at nearly lunchtime Sunday. We think of asking for the key, but don't persist. Adjacent, you can hear the voices in the kitchen, a seasonal taverna, with a sloping, graded bamboo screen roof. Out front, the morning crop of octopus draped over a clothesline. Inside, nothing fancy, calamari, bread, iced tea, or a glass of beer. A couple of tentacles grilled up quick. Bream or bass or snapper. Nothing unusual and nothing out of place. A grim-looking Greek-American in a broad-brimmed hat comes padding in. A little lag, and then his dreadful, raucous wife. It makes no difference here, not to us, not to several spindly, lethal-looking cats, a local Adonis and his cheerful, greasy friend, the happy-seeming cook and waitress combined, her father or in-law absorbedly firing up the coals. I just came back in after strolling round our strange demesne in shorts and flip-flops, cheap Chinese Panama, plus Calvin Klein shades won in a raffle at work a week before we left. Under a stumpy fig, upon the barest patch of ground, I drizzled out libation to Apollo, assuming last tap Heineken will constitute libation. Gail, I should have written you more letters in the past. It would have done me good. No matter, by train we were only 50 minutes away. Can you see me now? You thought me funny with my immanental and transcendental. So did I, of course, though still believe the distinction happens to be true. I put the insect out. It had imposed its strangeness long enough. Outdoors has suddenly become more personal somehow, even if that alien circumambient noise is only changed for me. Here are the usual commonplaces. Life is unfathomable. Each existence only knows itself, and what it knows is mostly dark and dull. The other insects near at hand make a noise like scraping combs on tabletops, or worse, and dowdy jays add racket all around. Impenetrable, uncomforting, in various ways we scrape and chafe and shift and shrill. You know, in Greece you cannot flush the paper. You fold it and put it in a pail or bag to be discarded later. This morning, under the bag within a little plastic lidded bin, securely wrapped, I lodged our passports and our money. All week I had sought the perfect hiding place so we could take the air, nip for a swim, absent ourselves and set our minds at ease. Well, rather late I found it, and in the placement added social commentary too. In the time I've known him, Augie's gone from bean-pot penury to palpable acclaim. And though I know you know that anyway, it just sounds good to say it. At Monolithos, we climbed through pines up cut stone steps to reach St. Pantaleimo's church on top of Monopetra. We made our way inside the scrubby though intact holy space with its scraggy icons, plastic bags. We fished and dried 5 candles in a paper towel and brought them sputtering to flame with matches, or easier, sharing a light. We set them back in the tin rectangular tray of sand and water, and blacked out wicks had burned right down. What did we wish for? What could we utter that might safeguard the weeest bit of what we are and love? What could we do? What could I rightly say? As I sat here, having worked myself up to tears to ask these things, still bearing you in mind, a skinny bird, this nondescript, comes to perch on the branch behind a big hibiscus. He cannot reach the scarlet trumpet, nor its golden dusted tongue. He hops and cocks and looks around. A coal tit without the coal, a blue tit without the slightest trace of blue. If he were a hummingbird, he'd dive inside. He's not. Instead, he pecks away behind. I think he may be trying to carve a back door in, but it's ants he's after. Ants he gets. I leave a pause here for you to say something back, perhaps about the bird, perhaps about the flower. I'm sure about the ants, by the way, because I looked there later. We do what we can. Illumination bobs right there before your nose and checks and pecks and flies away. From time to time, the something rumbles louder, distant, and when it comes, carries a cliffside off and leaves the hotel stranded, or buries half the town. Please understand, there's nothing I would wish against these placid, oddly silent crowds that populate the beaches, some gross, most semi-naked, some delectable. Nothing I would wish to bear down merciless on them and their mild lubricities. We all need rest and creature comfort. We all, though, and I take the risk you'll disagree, to have a friend so well disposed and generous as you, it's tempting after all to say, yes, that will do, but we all can't stick with sun and sea, even in their amplitude, or find in our failings and indulgences the subtlest support. There's something else, as you could testify, that puts us under, pulls us back again. There's something else in birds and birdlessness, something else we light a candle for and place it in that dingy dish of wax and sand.